Good evening, everyone. My name is Jodi Hammer, and I'm happy to be here with you today, talking about resume writing, one of my very favorite topics. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce myself very briefly. I work with the Global Reentry Program of the National Peace Corps Association. And as such, I have the privilege of being able to work with you, the RPCV population, and the evacuees on helping you with job search topics and such. So very excited to be here. I'm also an RPCV myself, having served in Ecuador from 1994 through 97. And I'm looking forward to this session. I would like this session to be fairly informal. So I encourage you, when you do have questions, to please drop them in the chat box, and we can certainly address those. My colleague, Olivia, is working diligently behind the scenes, helping with monitoring the chat box and feeding me questions as they come up. So we'll have time to, I'm sure, get to many questions. So I'm excited to be here, so thank you so much for being along for the ride here. And I do want to mention that we are recording this session, so just to be aware of that, and we will be posting it eventually up on our Global Reentry playlist of the NPCA YouTube channel. So you can go back and watch it if you need, or share it with friends, that type of thing. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. And just very, very briefly, I want to talk about the Global Reentry Program. We consider ourselves a clearinghouse, if you will, connecting RPCVs, evacuees, with services and resources available to them. We have 4 pillars, if you will, within our division. There's the career services pillar, which is where I spend most of my time, providing job search, transitional assistance to RPCVs in need. There's also, however, the education pillar, so connecting RPCVs with resources and schools that provide special funding and scholarships and such through one of many programs designed to attract RPCVs. So helping connect people that want to go on and study, maybe get a graduate degree. And then the third pillar of well-being, very, very important. And there were several sessions, I know, in this area when the evacuation had just taken place, and really trying to help meet those needs of, it was a trauma really at that time. And it's still difficult, but I'm really impressed with the RPCVs that I've interacted with and the evacuees on how strong, resilient you are, and whether you're thinking of going back or in a position where that may not make sense and looking to go forward and explore careers and such. I've just been very impressed by RPCVs. You're good people, of course, and that's why I love working with you. The final pillar is really continued service, and that is more looking at staying involved, right? And whether that's here in the States once you get back, or in whatever country you may live in, eventually and such, but staying involved and working for the continuation of Peace Corps, of course, as well. Now more than ever, that's extremely important, right? Where there are 0 operations right now, or volunteers that are in the field. And so it's very, very important to help with that goal as well. So you can always get involved in the advocacy division if you should so choose. So let's go ahead and really just jump right in to what the topic is for tonight, and it's resume writing. So who loves to write resumes? If there's anyone in our audience that loves to write resumes, go ahead and just put in the chat box, I love writing resumes, or just yes. And let's see how many we get. I'm looking at the chat box, and I'm actually not seeing any so far, which is no surprise. I know very few people who actually enjoy writing resumes, especially their own. I know I work with people and help them in writing their resumes, right? But writing my own is a lot harder, because it's so much easier to help others, and trying to craft your own is always a challenge. But my goal in working with you is to really try to make it less painful, the whole process of writing resumes, right? And some things that you can do to, minimize the amount of work. You still have to put a lot of work into writing resumes, right? But try to not start from ground zero. For example, when you are applying for a job, and let's say you're applying maybe for 3 different types of jobs, out there. And so you have kind of 3 different resumes, right? Once you've crafted your resume to a position, when the next time you go for a position, think of which resume or which past job that you've applied for would be closest or most similar to this job that you're going for now. You start with that resume, and that way you don't have to do all of the tedious, changing it and all of that. Chances are, if it's similar, you won't have to change quite as much. You will still change some, and you still need to get in those keywords and phrases and really make it reach and speak to the person who's reviewing it. But speaking of keywords, on this page, I do have a graphic here that's really a word cloud. And for those who aren't familiar with word clouds, they're wonderful. And there are many free word cloud generators that are out there on the web. If you just do a Google search for free word cloud generator, you will get, I'm sure, many. The one that I used to use more than others was Wordle, so like Word, WORDLE.com. And you literally would just dump whatever it is. If it's the job description, for example, say that's a Word document or whatever, you just copy and paste whatever that content is into where they, the space they provide you, and boom, you push enter and it creates a word cloud. And what a word cloud is the bigger the word, the more commonly it's repeated in whatever you had submitted. So it gives you an idea of what are the keywords. And so in this case, when you look at this one, obviously resume pops out, huge, but other words like planning, search, career, job, those also pop out. And then there's some tiny, words, but so word clouds I just think they can be useful. I used to always tell people, and some like to do this still, highlight, the keywords, the words that keep repeating themselves, and that's fine. But this is a way for it to do it for you, without you having to necessarily go through and spend that, that time doing that. So that's just another little tip that I've thrown in here. So today we're going to talk about different types of resumes. And first, I want to distinguish something, because resumes and CVs, there's a lot of confusion about those. And the easy way to think of it, in my mind, is here in the States, we use resumes, right? Pretty much everywhere else outside the States, they use CVs. So what's the real difference? Well, resumes are much more concise, right? And they focus on your work experience and your expertise, right? Whereas the CV focuses more, it's more focused on academia, right? So the audience is definitely, like, academia might be, one here in the States that you might even use a CV for. Outside of that, not so much, right? But I think this graphic shows pretty well, the length and such, right? A resume is generally going to be 1 to 2 pages long. Now, I myself like a 1-page resume or a 2-page resume. I'm not a big fan of the 1 3/4 or 1 1/4 resume. If your resume ends up being 1 1/4 page, just goes over onto that page by a little bit, I would encourage you to try to tighten it up, maybe work on the margins a little bit, and not eliminate them, but try to think of some ways to tighten it up so that it could fit on the 1 page. Because here's what a 1 1/3 or 1 1/2 or any blank space on that second page, here's what it screams to the resume reviewer generally. Normally if you have a 1-page resume and it's full, or a 2-page and it's complete, if you have the space, it doesn't give the reviewer the opportunity to say, wow, I really like this experience. I wonder if she also has XYZ. Well, no, duh, she would have put it, she had blank space. So it screams blank space. There's nothing else about me that makes me special, that, it's just, that's what it screams. So I'm not a big a big fan of you know, the 1.5 or 1.25 or whatever. I just, that's my own. That's definitely my own belief. Other people are fine with the 1.5, so it just depends. But to me, I think you could either tighten it up or stretch it out. If it's 1 3/4 pages or over 1.5, stretch it out. Make the headers a little bigger and easier to read. That's a bonus for the person who's reviewing it, right? They don't want that microscopic font size and on all of that. So now with back to the resume and the cover letter, there, you know, like I said, the resume emphasizes more of your professional experiences, and the curriculum vitae, or CV for short, is more of kind of that academic, right? All of that. They both generally are reverse chronological order, with the most recent jobs or experience or education first, right? And you work back, because employers are typically much more interested in your most recent jobs than jobs that are, you know, 10 years ago or 15 years ago or even more, right? So so this, I hope that gives you kind of a little bit. Now, the confusing part is a lot of employers here in the States, they don't really know what a CV really is. And so they see it as, oh, it's the hip new term for resumes. So you'll see, how many of you have seen a job vacancy, a pretty standard job here in the States, where they've said, send your CV and, you know, cover letter to whatever. If any of you have, yes, Carolyn, you've seen it, and I'm sure some others have as well. The tricky part is that could mean CV, but generally here in the States, if it's not an international position and it's not academia, they probably are using that as another term for resume. So just be aware of that. And one thing you can do if you are in a situation where you're wanting to apply for a job and you're wondering, gosh, they say CV, you know, try to find somebody who works at the company. And there's a variety of ways to do that, right? You can look, you know, do your LinkedIn, you know, search, people search, where you know, search for people who, you know, former employers, Peace Corps, current employer or current industry or whatever, is that company, right? And many times you'll get hits, you know, from that are like second degree, and you are connected, you are a family. So there's no reason you should not reach out and do an invitation to connect on LinkedIn. And say, you know, hey, I'm a fellow RPCV, having served in Ecuador, would love to connect with you professionally, period. Let them accept your invitation, and then you can go back with a little bit more, you know, I'd love to hear more about your experience. I noticed you worked at this company. You know, I'm in the process of, you know, considering applying for a job there, and they're mentioning CV, but as I understand it, most jobs here in the States are, you know, want resumes. Do you have any insight into that? I'm sure they'd be, you know, helpful if they're, you know, now sometimes people don't check their LinkedIn as often either, so you've got to remember that as well. But those are just some tips, okay? So CV versus resume. We're talking resume in general. So next, so like I said, they're not the same, right? I've covered most of these points here. CVs can be longer. They're oftentimes many pages, several pages long, right? Because there's more information that you're putting into it. They're very science-based. Sometimes positions, you know, research or scientist positions, in addition to academia, will use, you know, the more traditional CV. And it really emphasizes, you know, what your research is and those kinds of things, okay? Medical as well. So, but for this purpose, now that we've gotten through the resume versus the CV, we're gonna focus on basically 3 types of resumes. And then I am going to talk in the end a little bit about the federal resume as well, but I do have a different session dedicated solely to that, because it's a whole different, you know, ball game. And so I'm going to spend an entire session talking about more of the federal resume and the federal job search. And that's coming up in July. So for tonight's purposes, we're really going to focus mostly on the chronological, functional, and hybrid. So defining them very briefly, the chronological is by far the most common when we speak of resume. That's the expectation. And it would be reverse chronological, with that most recent job first and then working your way backwards. So that in general, if you haven't heard anything else, I would encourage you to use a chronological, you know, reverse chronological resume. Now, the functional resume can be good in certain situations. It's quite different because what it has is, instead of the your employer's name and where it was and your job title and then the bullets underneath, I recommend bullets. Some will say paragraphs are okay. If they're very short, they're okay, but I would definitely encourage you to do bullets. I think it pops a lot more. But in the functional resume, you don't have those bullets underneath each job. You literally have like, generally it's 3, maybe 4 different skills areas that you're basically proving. So one might be project management. And you can think back in your experience, and whatever experience was most related, you can have that be your first bullet. You're not saying where it was, like what job it was that you did this in. You're literally just putting that bullet. It doesn't have to be reverse chronological in order of when you did these different things that prove that skill set. So you have these maybe 3. I like generally 3 of the areas, and how you. So you look at the job and you craft, what are the main things they're looking for, right? And then you have in the end, you have a very brief work history. Instead of professional experience, oftentimes it's labeled work history. And all that is your employer's name, the location, your job title, and the dates. No bullets under it, no description under it, just this is where, you have worked. So that's quite different, right? That can be good if you're changing careers where your most recent jobs would not necessarily pop or would not necessarily come to the surface really quickly, because let's be honest, when the employers are reviewing resumes, they're oftentimes giving your resume 7 to 10 seconds to make that connection. If they see something that hooks them and they say, I want to see more, I want to look at this person more further and consider them further, or not, right? So you really do have to kind of, get them and do it in a way that just, hooks. I always say hooks the employer, right? The functional resume too, it might be when you're changing careers, like I say, maybe you don't have as much experience in that new job title that you're going for. So the functional can kind of hide that in a sense. Maybe, you certainly can make a case. I mean, your Peace Corps experience was so formative and can help in so many different ways, right? You can make a case for yourself where it's not going to be, otherwise if they saw you working, let's say you were maybe in a profession, I don't know, maybe you were a teacher, a very noble profession, but now you're applying for something completely different. And if your last 10 years is as a teacher, they're going to kind of typecast you as a teacher. So in that case, it might make sense to use a functional resume, okay? And then you have the hybrid. And the hybrid is really a mixed version. So it kind of has both, right? It has a little bit of that, the skills, up front, and, what you have, and then those categories. But then it has a little bit more experience shown still under the actual jobs. So I'm going to show you examples of these. So I think that will help here. But are there any questions so far? I want to be really sensitive to taking your questions in the moment. We have a pretty small group, this time, I'm happy to, even if you're more comfortable unmuting yourself and just asking your question, that's absolutely fine as well. So are there any questions yet, Olivia, that you've seen come in?
There's one right now from Wendy. She asks, do you have some samples of good functional or hybrid resumes?
Yep, I do have some samples here that I'm going to share, and then the resources that you're going to get after this, we always follow up, with our, little email that, asks you to, do the quick evaluation. And I would just beg you to please do the quick evaluation. It literally takes just seconds. It really helps us in our programming to know what is being well received and what other kinds of workshops and such that you want. But in that, my point in replying to your question is that in that email, there will be some additional resources for where you can get some really good information. And I'll tell you, Balanced Careers has some really good information on functional and chronological and all of that. The Muse is one of my favorite sources. So those are going to be outlined in that as well. So you can find some pretty good ones online. The ones that I'm actually going to show you are from online as well, to just show you that you can find some there. And I'll point out some things that maybe I like or would like better on a couple things. So you'll see that as well. Let's look first at the chronological. Now, this is just one, like I said, I pulled this from online, and, you know, we all have our preferences on how we, you know, like resumes to be written. If you talk to 10 resume professionals, you're going to get generally 10 different, 10 different views, although there are some commonalities, right? There's going to be certain things that are different, but many times, you know, we'll agree on some of the big things. So I'm going to be talking about some of the big things, and then some of my personal preferences that are a little more, picky maybe, but I think it can make a difference. So, you know, as I said in the previous slides, the chronological resume is really the standard. I would plan to use that if, you know, all things equal, right? So you know, if you've, you know, had, you know, your jobs, you're going for something, you know, you just generally just default to this one, unless there's one of the situations that we'll talk about in the next one that come up as well. So being concise is really important with the function, with the chronological resume, because you're looking at 1 to 2 pages. To get everything in there. Now, obviously, somebody who's a seasoned professional, you're not going to be able to put all of your experience on the resume. And I know for me, it was one thing that was really hard was getting to the point where I couldn't really put my Peace Corps service on there when it's 25, you know, plus years ago, right? But I found a way to do it. So one of the tips that I give to people in this kind of a format as well, if you're like me and you've done your Peace Corps service some time ago, you could choose to have a separate category. Maybe it's not going to be up there with your professional experience, but it might be a separate category that's like titled something like international service, or, you know, community service, whatever it is, you know, depending on what else you had. I mean, I used to, you know, be the arts director person for a camp, a summer camp for kids that were infected or affected by HIV/AIDS. And so I would put that under this same category as my Peace Corps service to still get it in there, especially if I were going for certain roles, you know, that would be more impressive. So there are ways to still get it in, but typically you're looking at sharing in a chronological resume the most recent, you know, 10 years, 7 to 10 years. I mean, if you don't have that much, you share what you have. But if you have 15, 20 years, you may not share it all. But you might, you know, you might have to have another category that's like other related experience, and then have some of those things, because you don't want those big gaps in your, you know, in your job listings either, right? So, so you can see here now in this example, like the top part where you see her information, that's perfectly fine, right? And she's in Singapore. Olivia, right by you, right? My colleague Olivia's in Singapore. So
Yeah, I was talking about that.
yeah. Now that could work well for her or not, depending on what kind of job she's looking for and where. If she were going for a job in the States, and it was not something that had Singapore as maybe some kind of, you know, where you would be visiting or representing or whatever, I would probably encourage this person to leave off the actual, you know, maybe leave that off and put her, you know, her email, her phone number, and you know, whatnot. Now, or some people, if they're marketing themselves for Washington, D.C. or Portland, Oregon, they could put, you know, their, you know, like some people will put like Portland, Oregon, you know, seeking, you know, something like where it has like Portland, Oregon listed there to kind of get them in there. Now, if you have a full address that's in the city that or area that this job that you're applying for is in, there's no problem putting it. I mean, the, you know, 123 Cincinnati Street, you know, whatever, that's fine to put. It really shows them, wow, they really are here. But if not, you could just put the city and the state or whatnot for that. So moving on to in the beginning now, how this resume, and there's a lot of different types of chronological resumes, so I try to not lock myself or people into one specific or only one. In this one, this person is an accountant. So it makes sense for her to put accountant and like the specialized skills right underneath. And then there's that, in this case, a paragraph. Now, if I were writing this or working with this person and reviewing their resume, I would probably advise them, I would definitely advise them to take out these, like the paragraph, instead put bullets. And I would probably, like, you have meticulous, bilingual, professional with extensive experience. That's a lot of adjectives there. So maybe you just choose one in the beginning. But I like the with extensive experience in, like, I might quantify, with 7 years of specialized experience or something like that. But you could put those into bullets that might pop a little bit more. And then within the professional experience, note, as a traditional chronological resume, this one is reverse chronological, and it goes, most recent, and then, goes down from there. Now, the other thing that is the one item that I would probably argue with on this sample would be the dates. Notice how the dates here are listed as 2000 to 2001 for the first entry. Now, that's great, but like, how long was she there? I mean, that could have been 2 years, January 2000 to December 2001, or it could be just 2 days or 2 months. So it's a big difference. And I know people do that oftentimes because they want to hide the job gaps. So I understand it, but at the same time, it can be difficult. And for certain jobs, if they're not going to call you and say, what was this, when was this necessarily, they're just probably going to go to somebody else and be like, we'll just go to somebody that we know what their experience was. So I generally do advocate for the month, year as well. With one more thing I was going to say up on the top two, under the accountant, instead of having that, some people will just do key qualifications, and they'll have sentences similar or fragment sentences, because you're not putting I in there. You're not saying, I have this. I save the I for your LinkedIn profile. You can definitely use it there. But for your resume, you really want to keep it just that, simple, crisp statements and such. And then here, the ED action verbs, and when you can, including the numbers, as it makes sense, those kinds of things. Now, in this example, and in many of the ones that I'm going to be spotlighting here, there's a category called accomplishments, which can be really, it's really big in the federal sector. They like that accomplishments and, awarded XYZ or promoted to, whatever GS level within, X period of time based on proven performance and dedication, things like that. So that's fine to have the accomplishments. Some people will just put the accomplishments within their bullets. Yeah, so that's what I'll say about that. And then on the bottom, education after the professional experience. And I know many of you are probably saying, but my counselor at school or wherever, they told me education is the first thing I put on the resume. And I have a big issue with that. I used to work in academia, and I understand that in their mind, they see your most recent, degree is the most important thing. It is the most recent, it's da 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 da. But the problem is it also typecasts you as a new grad, no experience. So even if, you had your master's, you've been out for a long time, whatever, when you see education first, they're not looking so closely where it's, what was the school? What was the date? They're just looking, glancing, right? And so if they see that, they think, oh, new grad, no experience. So that can really hurt you. So I would definitely put that education after. Now, I know that a lot of you have your master's degree and you just got it and you're like, I want to put that right up front. And you certainly can. Or you could include that in your first bullet under your key qualifications right up front, where you could have bilingual professional with MBA and 2 years of specialized experience in da, da, da. Right? That could be your first bullet where you're getting it up there. You could also put after the name, comma, MBA or whatever your degree, is. So there are other ways to get your education that you're very proud of and that's very applicable up front without just dropping the education header up front. Okay. So yeah, education is on the bottom. And the last thing I would say about this is, with education, I always recommend, if at all possible, put 2 entries. Not just one, because you're not supposed to put, here in the States, I'm talking, not abroad, you don't put your high school, right? generally, you just put your, your bachelor's, whatever, your, undergrad, and then if you have a graduate degree, the graduate degree, and that would go first, the graduate degree, right? Reverse chronological. But some of you maybe don't have that, but sometimes employers say in their job descriptions, master's preferred or bachelor's required, master's preferred. How many of you have seen that? You could certainly just type it in there. Yes, I'm sure you have seen a lot of those because, and it's really frustrating for people who don't have a master's yet because it's like, right? So I have a trick for you. On your resume, when you're doing your resume and you have your education header and your category, you put your bachelor's, whatever it is. Don't put bachelor's on the first line. Put in bold the university name and the location, and then in italics in the second line, put your degree and the date you got it or whatever, right? That's gonna, you don't want to scream at them, I have a bachelor's, right? If they're looking for ideally a master's, but they're open to a bachelor's. And then enter another entry. So by that, I mean, if you did a student exchange program, right, in college where you a study abroad program, or, here in the States, there are exchange programs that take place, anything like that. If you don't have that, your Peace Corps pre-service training can be your second item, right? Now, I would make an exception to the whole do that like reverse chronological and put your education first and then your pre-service training. But that was an educational experience where you received, and I think it's usually in your DOS, X number of hours of language, X numbers of hours in technical and cross-cultural, whatever. So you can put that as a second entry because trust me, I'm the person who gives this advice all the time. And yet, if I'm reviewing a resume and I'm looking at it quickly and I just scan down and I see the education header and there's 2 entries with a space between it, ideally, right? A blank space between it. What's my automatic assumption? Anyone? In the chat box, you can certainly add. What's my automatic assumption? Exactly, a master's. I'm instantly, because I'm not slowing down to go, where did they go? What was their degree? Usually it doesn't matter, right? Oftentimes it's just master's required, but it doesn't even say what the master's has to be in, right? So that's another trick that I like to share with people. So any questions that any of this has brought up on a chronological resume before we move on to the functional and then beyond? So yes, any questions in the chat box?
Yes, we do. From Carolyn, I heard the longer you're out of school, the more it makes sense to remove the date you received the degree. Would you agree with this advice?
Yes, I would. It's not necessary as you get further and further out, and in fact, it can harm you because it can, for me, for example, it could actually work against me because it could set me up, or someone who's a seasoned professional, who's graduated, 20 years ago, it could set them up for really age discrimination even. So yes, that is definitely true. You don't necessarily have to put it.
And there's another question from Jennifer. Yeah. If there is a specific education requirement or certificate requirement, would you list those first?
If there is a specific education or what was the other?
Or certificate requirement.
Okay. Yes, you could. If you know that is a specific, I would probably I would include that in your key qualifications. Certification or certified, in whatever it is, I would include it in your key qualifications instead of just having at the bottom, because a lot of times at the bottom, like after you do, you have, it's in different categories, right? Your name and such, and then your key qualifications or professional summary or whatever you want to call it, and then professional experience, and then education, and then there's this catch-all. It could be specialized skills and trainings or specialized skills and certifications. Lots of different things could fall here, right? And the title would depend. But I would say if they're looking for that specifically, you might want to get one of those things up in your key quals instead of just depending on the very end. Good questions.
And another one, another one from Jessica. Sure. Would you make up a title to make your previous job more clear? For example, my title is pre-award specialist. Would you change it to grants administrator or something else to make it more clear to employers who aren't familiar with grants?
Yeah, you can definitely, like, well, in your LinkedIn profile, of course, you absolutely do that, and you should do that, and you know, can have, like, as you describe yourself, you might have 2 or 3 different kind of titles, you know, that are there to, you know, catch different things. But in your resume, you absolutely could do that. You could do like a slash, like, you know, pre-award, you know, grants administrator, maybe it's you know, pre-award specialist parenthesis grants administrator, or something like that, like where it's, you know, that gives more of a that's more descriptive for many people, right? So you could totally do that if you needed to.
And then another question, can we post different resumes on different sites?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely you can. Are you making your, my question for you would be, are you making your, I'm assuming you're making your resumes searchable, right? Just know that if you're spinning yourself completely differently, right, that could be cause for concern if somebody finds your resume here and then they find another one and they're like, wait, this is the same person, but they're totally, you know what I mean? Like if it doesn't jive, if it doesn't like, but let me rephrase. If it gives a different picture where it's completely like it's confusing and such, but if it's just you're spinning your, you know, marketing experience in this one and you're marketing, you know, whatever, and in this one you're more spinning a different kind of experience that you have, that's fine. But remember the word, obviously remember the resume that you use for any job. Always keep a file and keep not only the job description and, you know, what you submitted and your resume that you submitted, because when they call you, sometimes it can be, you know, it can be some time, right? It might be 2 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever. And when they call you, and the thing that you don't want to do is say, oh yes, great, can you send me the you know, the job description? Or you go, worse yet, you go online, you're like, great, let me look that link, and I'll look at the job description and it says, nope, it doesn't work, it's a non-working link. Sometimes they'll take those down when they stop, you know, promoting the job. So you definitely want to always, you know, just save a copy of everything in a file and be organized. Okay. Great. It looks like we don't have any other questions right now, but again, thank you for all the questions. And if you do have additional ones, just dump them in there and we will get through as many as we can. So at this point, I want to go on to talk a little bit about a functional resume and how that might look, right? So here you can see the name, and then, you know, underneath and you know, you have the address and that kind of thing, and then your qualifications, or I would call this one key qualifications, because I just feel like you have a lot of qualifications, right? These are just my key qualifications. They're like my, you know, most relevant and whatnot ones. So and you know, and again, I always say try to include numbers and make things help make it pop. But notice how the second header is, and this could be titled something different too, but skills and experience, right? It might be. And then you have project and program assistance, research, and, you know, you have all these different you know, parts, research and writing, and then oops, sorry, the last one. Sorry, it's, come on, there we go. So the functional is, as I said, you know, well, as I said first, it does emphasize more of your skills versus your work history. So it's not so much where you worked, but what are the skills that you bring that could make you competitive for this job, right? And it can be good for not only career changers, but also people that have, you know, job gaps. If you're somebody who's had a lot of gaps in your, you know, job history, you can unfortunately be perceived as being a job skipper. What I mean by that is organizations can think, oh, you're not going to stay with me long. Your track record is such that you stay 3 months and then you leave and you stay, all of that. Now, I would absolutely tell you, to reassure you, you do not need to worry about like the gap that you have because of COVID-19. Everyone understands that. Everyone knows that so many people have lost their jobs, right? So it's not, don't worry about that. And in fact, I would say, you know, use your story. You have a compelling story, right? You are a, you know, if you're an evacuee, I'm saying, you have been evacuated due to the worldwide, you know, pandemic and worldwide evacuation of all 7,000 plus volunteers. That's a, you know, people are like, I had so many people contacting me saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is awful that, you know, they're coming home and they want to help in any way possible. So that can actually work for you as well. So don't worry about the COVID-19 job gaps. And then my only thing to say on your functional resumes to beware of is some people are either, some employers are not familiar with this form, you know, the functional resume, or they're assuming that you're trying to hide something. So it's like, oh, what are they trying to hide? You know, because they've seen resumes in the past that people have maybe been trying to, you know, cover certain things up. So you do have to be careful of it, but I think it can be great in certain situations and can work for you. So you just need to, you know those and that. So you can see here the skills and experience, and then like their coordinated compilation. These experiences that are under there are in no chronological order. Whatever ones are most relevant to the job that you're going for are the ones that you're going to put up front, right? And I want to show you the page 2 here so you can just see the employment history that I was talking about. Look how concise that is. I mean, and you might even, some people will even put it all on one line if they have shorter titles. I don't like it when some are all on one line, but then there's one long one that goes over and it just kind of breaks the continuity or the consistency, because I think it's a lot about consistency in resume writing. So just literally nothing about what you did in those jobs, because presumably that's all put into those categories that you had on the first page. And then into education, similar specialized skills, trainings, and certifications. In this case, highlighting your, you know, languages, computer skills, all of those kinds of things. Questions on the functional resume? Olivia, any coming in?
None so far.
No?
None so far.
Okay, no problem. Just drop them in if you have them. That's absolutely fine. And then let's look at kind of more of a hybrid or a mixed resume, right? And this one, again, one from the internet to just kind of show you what's out there. You have the applicant's name and information up front. And then you see how on the top, this is kind of this skill, like they put the kind of like a title, right? Or, you know, your title, if you will, as related to what you're going for. And there's even kind of a tagline, right? The effectively managing staff in both the blood bank and business arenas. Like it just gives you an idea of what this person has done, right? And then you have your skill, you know, sentence here, you know, your fragment, right? Results oriented. Now this is the one where there's 3 adjectives, right? Results oriented, high energy, hands-on. Wow, I would probably use one of those just to, you know, because too much can sometimes be, I think, over the top, right? With 10 plus years experience and a successful record of accomplishment in the blood banking, that's strong, right? 10 plus years, that pops, right? And FYI, for the numbers for your resume, on your resume, when you have, like, we all learned growing up, under 10, spell it out, right? Always. So 8. E-I-G-H-T, you would write that out. You wouldn't put 8. Let me tell you, in resumes, you can break that rule, unless, I would say the only people that I would caution against doing that would be people who are applying for jobs in media, like or, you know, writing to you know, so that you want to show them, you know, all of the MLA or whatever standards they're using for writing. But other than that, they pop 8. The number 8 is going to pop so much more than E-I-G-H-T, right? So you can break those rules. Then you can see the professional experience, how there's information under each of those. And there's still some, you know, there's description and bullets, accomplishments, right? You know, the 2 entries there. And then education and credentials, similar. So you can see how that's kind of a mix between the 2. And let's see, it looks like we have maybe 2 questions that maybe are coming in. Yep, you're right. It seems like the hybrid resumes can be similar, yep, to the chronological ones. It's just that it's a little more, typically with the chronological resume, you're putting key qualifications, like just a header, and you're not putting necessarily this, like, I see myself as, you know, education coordinator, supervisor, and then the tagline, and then, you know, but you're absolutely right. That sentence where it says results-oriented key, you know, professional with 10 plus years experience, that's very similar to the chronological. But what's not as similar is the next part within that, where it says key skills include, and it has that whole listing of skills. That's more like what you might have on a hybrid or on the functional resume. So, but good comment. Let's see, question from Carolyn. Would you say most employers are familiar with functional resumes? You know, I would say that would depend on where in the States. If they're, living maybe in a major metropolitan area, especially maybe, DC, or where there's a lot of, like where they might have more experience with it. I think, from my experience, like in the Midwest, I grew up in the Midwest and that's where my whole family is. I find that people were less familiar with that. And I don't know if it's because maybe I don't think people use it as much because it's maybe a little more conservative in general, not typecasting, but so they might stick with the more traditional. But you just need to weigh the pros and cons of whether you use one, right? Is it, if your situation's compelling where you have either the job gaps or, significant job gaps or changing careers altogether, and you've been running into a brick wall when you've tried with the traditional resume, then why not try it? See if it works. It might catch someone's attention more that way. So it really comes down to also, trial and error, right? And just being willing to do that. Great.
We have a question from Janet. I'm just now starting a new job search. I am an older RPCV. If I want to pull out some of my early research work from way back for a job I want to do alongside other skills from more recent jobs, how would I incorporate that in a resume?
Yep, I think there's a couple ways you could do it, but it depends on how long ago it was. If it was over 15, 20 years ago, right, you're probably going to want to pull my approach where for my Peace Corps service, where I took it out of my professional experience because otherwise there's this big gap or I have this really long resume. And put it into, other related experience or other, something so that you don't have to have you're not going chronologically with no gaps. You just have the ones that are most recent and then other, relevant experience or something like that. And then you can put those in there. That's what I would say.
Question from Wendy.
Uh-huh.
I had my own business in an unrelated field. Some people feel triggered or judgmental towards that field as it is not mainstream. Is it best to change the title of that job or make a functional resume instead?
That's hard for me to answer when I don't know what the title, I mean, if you're comfortable sharing the title, I'd be happy to give you my, my thoughts on it, on your question, or you can certainly reach out to me or stay on the line afterwards. I mean, I can stay on for a few minutes after, 9 and take some, additional questions that people might have. I'm happy to do it that way if you'd prefer to, not share it.
Like Wendy says,
acupuncturist.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, acupuncturist, she says. Yes, I'm sorry. There might be some, you're saying there might be some, whatever, against that profession. Is that what you're?
Yeah, Wendy said, some people might feel judgmental towards that field.
And is it best to change the title? What kind of a title would you think about using, Wendy? If you can unmute yourself, you're welcome to, and just, we can kind of have a conversation about it instead of waiting with the chat. It's totally up to you.
All right, can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, great. Yeah, I mean, some people don't feel like it's a real job. I could change it to health educator, or I'm not sure what else to do with that. A direct patient care provider, holistic health.
Yeah, holistic health provider. That would be a nice one. Maybe you put that with it. I mean, where are you looking for jobs, Wendy? What kind of area in the States?
Well, right now I'm in Florida, but I mean, I just came back. This is where I'm staying.
Right.
I could go anywhere. I used to live in San Francisco. I'm from Detroit. I'm all over the place.
Yeah. Okay. As someone who's lived in San Francisco for years as well, you would have absolutely no problem with acupuncturist, holistic care provider. That's very, accepted out there in general, I would say. And I would say in your bigger, more metropolitan areas, I wouldn't see a problem with that. Maybe though you add, like you said, you were saying you could use another title. I would maybe add it, maybe it's holistic health provider / acupuncturist, or colon acupuncturist, whatever, something where you're getting your actual title in, but you're also getting something that's more, understandable. I mean, some people are kind of freaked out by the thought of acupuncture. It's like, oh, needles, So, it could be that too.
We have another question related to that.
Yeah.
If we're putting a job title at the top and selling ourselves with skills, etc., after this style of resume, is there any advice you can offer about selecting more easily identifiable job titles?
And selling yourself with skills, yeah, for the style. Is there any advice you can offer about selecting? Yeah, well, what I would say is I would look at the jobs that you're looking at, right? And the field that you're looking in, and what are the job titles used for those jobs that you're going for? And there's going to be some overlap, right? There's going to be some that are probably more common than others. And from that, I would take, things, but I would also get information from doing career chats, as I talk a lot about doing, informational interviews, or I call them career chats, where you're asking for 15, 20 minutes of their time to chat a little more about themselves and learn a little more about their experience and any tips or advice they might have for someone such as yourself exploring opportunities in whatever sector. People are pretty, open to that, but you could get probably more information from people in that field as well. And reaching out, you're connected to a huge family, right? Your RPCVs, you have RPCV jobs, that's the Facebook group, right? You have RPCV groups all over, whatever. Throw that out on the, on their, website, or on their, when they go back and forth, and, just saying, hey, what kinds of, what has worked for people, or what do people recommend? People want to help you. So, yeah, I would absolutely look at those as ways to also, weigh in on like what might be appropriate to put there. And you don't absolutely have to put something there like education coordinator supervisor, right? Maybe instead, you just have, like I said, more of the regular, chronological resume, where you put, key qualifications or professional summary or something like that. Okay.
And Jenna's asking, would that be good to do if I want to completely change careers?
That's where the functional can come in really handy, because that allows you to focus on the skills that you bring, that maybe, you acquired the kinds of skills that are being required in this job, but not in a job that's with that title, if that makes sense. So that's where the functional the one that we were at before, let me, where we were talking about here, page 1 here, where you put them under the categories and, prove those different skill sets.
And Jennifer is wondering, what do you think about using a functional or a hybrid style resume when submitting for a federal position, if you include the specifics of dates and salaries that they typically look for?
Don't do it. Sorry. Federal, and I should have put that in my actual, in my PowerPoint. Thank you. I'll probably add that for the future. This is not the style you use for federal. Federal is and we're gonna get to federal actually right now. It's a whole different beast. I don't have a one to look at here, but what I would, you can certainly find them online. But if you go to USA Jobs is basically the kind of hub for applications and all for federal jobs. Federal jobs, even the job description, if any of you have looked at federal jobs, you probably come away with a headache thinking, X years of experience, 1 year of experience at the labor grade below. Well, I've never been in federal. How do I know what that's going to equate to? It's just, what's the pay grade? It's very confusing, right? And that's why, as I'm saying, I'm doing a separate session just on federal resume writing and the federal application process. But federal, you need to include everything that we talked about in the standard resume, right? Your dates, your job titles, dates, the organization's name and location, right? But in addition to that, you have extra things that you have to include, like your salary, which this is changing a little bit now, actually, and it's a good thing. They used to require your salary for federal. Now, many of them don't, and if they don't, when you're filling it out, it won't make it mandatory if it's, you know what I mean, if they don't absolutely require it. So you don't have to put it in, right? But with federal, remember, you have less leeway with the whole salary negotiation anyway, because you're going to go in, if you qualify for, this, GS7, you're going to go in, unless you have a proven salary history higher than the step 1, which is the bottom of the, the steps, there's like 15 steps for each of the grades. It's confusing, but you'll go in at that, like there's not as much negotiating as there is with other, kinds of organizations on salary and that kind of thing. But so you've got to put your salary, your supervisor's name, their contact information, whether or not it's okay to contact them, like whether or not you're okay with this employer, this federal employer, contacting your former employer. So you put that for each of your jobs that you had. So it's a beast, and obviously they become longer. Although some agencies are now putting a maximum of 4 pages on a federal resume, which is actually kind of nice, because I see ones that are like 10 pages long, and it's nuts. But yeah, so federal resumes don't use the funky, the functional, because in fact, I would encourage you to use the USA Jobs Resume Builder, which you go in and literally, you just plug in your information and it spits it out. Now, am I recommending you use that because I like it? That one? No, I don't particularly like it. In fact, I think I just don't like really the formatting as much. But what the employer likes, the HR professionals who are going to be reviewing that, they know exactly where to find everything. So, that's why for them, it works very well. So, yeah, so, and you'll hear a little more, well, tomorrow I was going to say, I'm going to be doing, for my podcast tomorrow, we're doing all things interviewing, and I'm going to have a guest who works in the federal sector and currently works at OPM, Office of Personnel Management, in their Center for Leadership training or development, and he knows about like the interviewing, but also the federal resumes. So if you want to tune in tomorrow at noon our time, you can look at our events calendar and sign up. But so yes, the federal resume is so different, and you're not going to use the functional style. You're just going to do more of that traditional reverse chronological. Yeah. Any other questions coming in, Olivia? Just jump them in the chat box, or like I said, we have a small enough crew. You can certainly unmute yourself, and I'd be happy to hear you talk and not hear myself talk. Well, while people are dumping those in, I'm going to go on really quickly on the STAR method of this is something that I just added to this. And it's the STAR methodology you think of a lot when you talk about interviewing, and we'll talk about that tomorrow in the podcast. But you can really incorporate this STAR methodology into your bullets that are descriptions of what's in the resume. You can use it in that as well. And so situation, right? Your task, your action, and results. And I just grabbed this from the internet to have an example here, but where it shows, and in this case, they're talking about with a business fraternity, right? And what they did to the accomplishment: organized business fraternity philanthropic events, which resulted in contributions exceeding $4,000. You're showing, what the situation was, what was done, the action you took, and the results. And a lot of people forget the results, right? So it's really nice to end with something like resulting in, but you don't always want to say resulting in. So sometimes you might say achieved a 23% increase in based on whatever it is. So you can flip it, right? But, and then I like this because it has the action verb type of things. Just, try to use those, action verbs. And it's typically ED action verbs. It's past tense, unless you're talking about your current job, in which case it would be first person present tense, like this: administer, develop, delegate. But in general, it's the past tense for everything else. Okay. Once it's done and over. All right. Let's see. I don't like writing about myself. Oh, Janet, I think most people on this would probably agree with you. I don't know who likes to write about themselves. It's much more fun to write about other people. But yeah, and I think people tend to be really humble as well, and so it's hard. Part of that being hard to write about myself is you don't want to brag. You don't want to come across as somebody who's, you know, conceited or just full of themselves. So that's where I think it's hard. But you know, you have to lose that humble aspect a little bit. I mean, there's a fine line, right? But you need to be your best advocate and put your best foot forward, and just, you know, say it like it is, and put it down, to, you know, really have an impact and hopefully, you know, get that job. So let's see, how can I get more feedback about why I'm getting few callbacks from sending out resumes? Is there a professional who can review my resume? Yes. Wendy, yes, absolutely. If you, we have, I don't know, Wendy, have you signed up for the mentor program? I know it's taken a little longer than expected to get the matches done because we had 350 RPCVs that requested mentors, and my colleague in the Global Reentry Program hand did this more or less. I mean, it just painstakingly. So we're about ready to kind of release those. But if you are still interested in getting one, in getting a mentor, because many times the mentors are the ones that will review your resume. But oftentimes in your different chapters, you know, your of RPCVs, and you should get involved with your local, you know, affiliate group. People will do it there. You can certainly send an email to me at careers@peacecorpsconnect.org. And, you know, I will do my best to, you know, give you some feedback as well. I am doing a lot of, you know, the reaching the larger audience and such, but I love the one-on-one, you know, work too, and would be happy to help you with that if you're struggling. So yeah, it's not too late to get a mentor. I think what you need to do is just send. Oh gosh, if you have in your I was going to say there was the matching form. It was like a form. What I would do is just email again. Olivia, can you drop that, the careers@peacecorpsconnect.org into the chat box, so that folks can email that, and we can get you in touch with the person and just put you on that list to get one. It may take, you know, a little bit of time just because they've, you know, finally gotten there within matching, like, you know, all of, you know, 300 and some so far, and they're looking for some more mentors or asking mentors to take more than one. So, but yeah, absolutely. Put the word out on your different groups that you're in, saying, hey, I'm looking for someone to review my resume for the XYZ sector. People will step up, trust me. And again, remember, you're going to get very different views. And so just take what works for you, leave the rest. Don't get frustrated with like, well, he said that and she said this and no, it's like we all have our own thoughts, and listen to their logic, why they agree with, why they do that, and why they recommend that. And then in the end, ultimately it comes up to you, down to you. You're the one who's responsible for your own resume. So awesome. Okay, great. I'm glad you signed up for a mentor, Wendy. You should be hearing back soon. Make sure that any of you, before you do take off tonight, download the chat box, which is, you know, if you look at the chat box on the very bottom, there's the 3 dots inside the square. Click on that, and the first thing I think that comes up, or that will, the very top of the choices, is download chat, and it will download it to your Zoom folder on your laptop. For example, if you're using a laptop, I have no idea where it goes if you're on a cell phone, but it goes somewhere. So get that so that you can you know, look if there was, or just take everything you want out of it before we sign out. All right. Any other questions, Olivia, that have come up about resumes? Or we're at the point right now where we're Q&A. It's actually just after 9, and I can take, a few more questions. If people have them, feel free to, take yourself off of, mute and just ask me, or totally up to you. Okay, let's see. Oh, I have the link to the forum mentorship. That's great. Awesome. Oh, thank you, Jennifer, for the kind comments. Mind going back to the, absolutely not. I will go back to the, yep, there you go. You can take a picture of it if you want. But if you do a Google search on S.T.A.R methodology, there's some people call it C.A.R, where it's challenge, C.A.R is another one, and then there's S.T.A.R, the situation, challenge, action, result. So people, there's different ways to describe the same thing, but yeah. All right. Well, I'm glad folks have, what's that?
I'm sorry, I had one more question. I hope it's relevant. It was back to, you know, I have about 3 or 4 different resumes for completely different fields. I'm mid-level, and I was told by a recruiter that I can't have my LinkedIn and I can't put something on Indeed and USA Jobs and ZipRecruiter and Glassdoor and having them all be for different fields, that the recruiters will find them all, and that I have to come up with like one super resume. And so I'm just a little confused still about that.
Yeah, that's really hard. And recruiters who use, I mean, I will say they do use that searchable, you know, LinkedIn's huge, right? Indeed's huge. There's so many different ones. So I think that they don't want to see you as somebody who's just painting themselves in so many different ways. So I think the challenge for you comes down to how can you pull this together into a cohesive and yet not overly comprehensive, but you are, if you're a mid-career professional and you have more experience, you can have a longer resume for certain things. But again, for private sector and NGOs, I would still stick with the 2 pages. For federal, obviously you go more than that, and you can, that's fine. CVs allow you to go more than that oftentimes. So I feel your pain, you know, if you're looking at different things and trying to just, you know, have it in those different categories. And when you're talking to, you know, when you're talking to people, you know, when you do your, you know, career chats and things like that, ask them their advice. Like, how would you, you know, if you're, you know, looking for diverse ones, I mean, Google's your best friend, right? Do a Google search on how do I craft my resume to be consistent on various platforms when I'm looking for drastically different work or jobs. You're going to find, I can guarantee you, you are not the first person asking that. You know, what I usually do when I have questions is I'll put in whatever it is, and then I'll put the muse because they're my favorite usually, and they have good, you know, advice. Just to steer you towards something as well, I did a tips for the mid-career professional, and that is on our playlist. Olivia, can you, I don't know if you can, from YouTube, I don't know if you have the playlist readily available. If not, you just literally can just, you know, you can go to, you know, our website and you can follow the, you know, chains, whatever, and get to it. But I know that there is one on tips for the mid-career professional. And I'm happy to talk to you more about that because that is a unique kind of situation too, you know, just being, you know, in the mid-career professional and what kinds of jobs you're looking at. And, you know, it might help knowing a little more about like what are the distinctive, like different jobs that you're looking at, like you know, like, can you give me like the different sectors that you're looking at that are so different?
I was looking in like government jobs, like a program analyst position. Yep. I was looking like training, teaching sorts of positions, writing positions. What else do? I can't go back to my acupuncture career right now, so I have to do something different.
Yeah. So with what you've shared so far, training and education are together. You could have those be one of your kind of bubbles, or not bubbles, but like your, right? Training, education, that kind of thing. And then, you know, the other ones that you mentioned, you know, having those as maybe a separate, I think you can do it. It's not easy, but I think you can definitely do it. And you could try doing it with the, you could try doing it with, you know, your functional, but, you know, in that case where you're trying to, you know, make a case for multiple things, but then listen to the feedback that you get, right? If you're talking to people and, you know, you say, what do you think of, like, show them 2 different versions. Like, what do you think between these versions? One's more of the functional that allows me to, you know, outline these, but then this is more chronological. Most people will probably choose the chronological because they're just not as comfortable with, they're just not as familiar with the other.
Yeah, I was told it looks like I've been jumping around too much and that I'm not focused. The chronological.
Yep.
So
Well,
maybe I
then
need
you might be the perfect candidate for that functional.
the functional. Okay.
Yep, because then you can really emphasize your skill sets and your accomplishments underneath in the bullets that support those. And then you just have your like simple work history that's, you know, not at all emphasized. It's just, right?
Okay.
I might try that. Yeah.
Okay. That's something to try. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Let me know how it goes.
Okay.
All right. Any other final question before we wrap up here? I just want to make sure we've gotten all of the questions addressed. All right. Well, I think what I'm going to do is turn the recording off here. And then if there are, I'll stay on for a few more minutes and we can go from there, okay? Thanks everyone for joining tonight, and I hope to see you at future sessions and such. Thanks so much.